Thank you, Sadhna, for reading the central message of what Easter means to us. And I'd like to spend a few moments sharing from the Bible the central message of Easter. And before I do that, would you please join with me in prayer? Dear God, we thank you for this day where we could remember this historic event that is so radical, that is mind-boggling and changing lives for centuries now, Lord. And as we try to recount this incident historically and try to understand how its message is alive even today for us because you are alive, I pray that this message will be a blessing for all of us. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen. So the title of the message I want to share from this passage that was read to us, I've titled it as Believe. That's, in one short word, we can say is the central message of Easter. And in fact, if you want to look at what is really the last words of Jesus before he leaves this world to his disciples, it is this message, believe. You know, so far, no one has ever seen someone who has been dead come back alive in person. And that's what Easter celebrates. It's for the first time in history that there was a person who actually died and came back alive and was able to convince people that there is a possibility of victory over death. And that is one of the central tenets of Christian faith. In fact, one of the followers of Jesus, the Apostle Paul, says, if Jesus did not rise again, our faith is in vain. We can pretty much pack up and go home. Because then there is nobody who can be there to save us. But it's a hard to believe thing, isn't it? And in fact, in the passage that it was one of the disciples of Jesus himself, who we see, his name is Thomas. He had been with Jesus for 3 years. Jesus actually told him, hey, you know what? They're going to crucify me. They're going to kill me. But in 3 days, I'm going to come back alive. Despite knowing that, he could not believe. Sometimes he has been categorized, I think, rather unfairly as the doubting Thomas. And it's become an idiom ever since. If you don't believe what someone says, when there is a possibility of that being true, you get called as a doubting Thomas. But to be fair to him, it's hard, isn't it? It was not just Thomas who couldn't believe that. He was not the only skeptic about Jesus, though he was with Jesus. In fact, all his other disciples didn't believe too in the first instance when Jesus comes alive. They're all terrified because the Romans captured Jesus and he was nailed to the cross, and they knew that the cops are going to come and they're next on the block. And they're hiding inside a room, and Jesus shows up, penetrating through a closed room. Why is it so hard to believe in resurrection? Why is it so hard to believe that Jesus came back alive? You know, unbelief is not simply the absence of faith, but rather it's the presence of our faith on something else. You know, our faith is fiercely attached to a sense that we feel we are competent to run our own lives and to judge for ourselves what is right and wrong. The reason we can't believe and accept that Jesus is God and He's a living God is because it has consequences. And it is always hard. And especially if we live in a culture which values knowledge very high. And historically, you know, when there was the great enlightenment and the flourishing of arts and sciences that literally birthed technology in Europe, is when people started to stop believing in God. And from there to our Silicon Valley where we live, no matter who you are, where you come from, which religion you hold, the universal belief, the collective faith system of Silicon Valley is we can do it. Give me a problem that can be fixed, and I'll fix it. I'll make an app and make money out of it. So that kind of gives us a sense of power in our fingertips that we can create solutions to all of life problems. So who needs God? And now with the emergence of AI and big data and Internet of Things, and it's just unleashed even more power into human hands, that it is very hard to believe in the existence of someone who is supernatural, isn't it? Because it is indeed nice to know that I can take care of my life. I can be in charge of myself, and I can control my destiny. And that is so locked in, and that is where our belief is. And so it's hard to create space to believe anything else. We are fiercely capable and sometimes irrationally believe that we have the competence to call the shots, to decide what is right and wrong for us, and to be our own masters and to live our own lives. And that's the reason sometimes we lack peace. Because when we think, I think there's some guests who are looking to come in, we can help them. When we think that we can actually take control of our lives, when we think that we are able to solve our problems and a crisis comes up into our lives, it is at that point our faith system gets exposed. You know, I was listening to a lecture by a former tech executive in San Francisco. She was in one of the top 4 tech companies in the Bay Area. Very, very successful person in her career. Accomplished a lot in a very short span of time. Had a bunch of startups that spun off. Until the moment came when her teenage son protracted a debilitating disease. She was able to try and, through her contacts, get the best medical experts from Stanford and UCSF, and after a prolonged amount of time, all of them said, we are sorry, this is the limits of technology and medicine. We cannot save your son. And I remember she was thumping the desk and telling me, in my company, I can move mountains across countries with the push of a button, but when it comes to my own son's life, why is it all these things that I have created are not able to save my son? At that point, it gets personal, isn't it? You see, money cannot solve all of our life's problems. And if we tend to put our faith in that, then we tend to work so hard, so much time, and including sacrificing our time with our loved ones, until something like this comes up. And it is not that it is foolish to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. It is not that there is no empirical evidence. In fact, if you read the 4 Gospels that were written by 4 different people with very diverse backgrounds, you know, from a medical doctor to a millionaire to a tax collector to a disciple who was the closest to Jesus, if you read all of their accounts, it's filled with data. In fact, Jesus, after he was resurrected, he came alive, he appeared to 500 people over 40 days. The very first people, the gospel writers say, who saw Jesus come out alive were women, and that would not be the best kind of evidence to portray if it was false. Because in those societies, women were not considered as someone whose statements could be taken to be true. And in fact, when the Gospels were written, many people who saw Jesus were actually alive. So if it was just 1 or 2 people, you can discount it as hallucinations or some kind of a weird experience. But 500 people and 40 days and several encounters prove that he was alive. So it was not that there was a lack of evidence, or it wasn't that it was sudden or surprising, because Jesus kept saying all along, hey, I'm going to die. and they're going to kill me, and I will come back in 3 days. You see, the resurrection faith is always faith in what Jesus has done and not in what he said. You can know all about what Jesus said. You can look at all the evidence that's presented there. In fact, there is a journalist, Lee Strobel, who's actually written a book that gives you all the evidences of how resurrection actually happened. It's because our faith is locked in something else, that we want to refuse to let go of this thing that we are believing so much about ourselves and our ability and transfer that faith to someone else, because that's going to put us in a very vulnerable situation. That's why Mary and Thomas and James couldn't believe. It's not that abstract principles can change a person's life. You know what? It's always a personal relationship. And that's why Jesus shows up to his disciples. And when you see that they have this encounter, you see what really happens. Immediately, when Jesus first shows up to Mary, she thinks he's a gardener, and then it says she opened his eyes. You know what she said first? Rabboni in Hebrew, which means my Lord. And here is Thomas. He says, I want evidence. Give me data. I need to touch his hands. I need to touch his feet. I need to do this. I need to do that. And yet Jesus comes. You know, he first chides him gently and says, here you go, Thomas. Go for it. Touch my hands. Touch my feet. He has no interest in doing all of that. He just says the two most profoundest words ever. He says, my Lord and my God, which has a huge meaning to it. You know, this gospel that was read to us, which is a historic narration of the life of Jesus, was written by a disciple whom Jesus says was his favorite, closest. And the entire Gospel of John only covers 21 days or 22 days of the life of Jesus, contrast to other three Gospels. He just focuses on the last 3 weeks of Jesus' life. In fact, majority of this Gospel focuses literally on the last week of his life. And here, when John is concluding, it's so fascinating. Jesus has 12 disciples. He picks this one guy, Thomas, and his encounter with Jesus, because he says that's where the crux is, because there are going to be many Thomases in this world who are going to find it hard to believe that Jesus is real, Jesus resurrected, and so he captures this in vivid detail, unlike the other Gospels. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So when Thomas sees Jesus, he drops all his demands for empirical proof, and he says, my Lord and my God. You know what that means? When you say you're Lord over someone, you're surrendering your rights to exercise control over your life to that person voluntarily. That's what Mary does and Thomas does. He says, so long I have been the Lord of my life. From now on I relinquish my right to control, and I want you to be the Lord of my life. And it only happens when you have that personal encounter. Religion will not give this to you. You can come to church, you can do all the things for all the years and have absolutely no experience like this if you have not had this encounter personally with the risen Jesus. But he wants to come and reveal himself to you. And so the message that Jesus leaves with Thomas is the message for you and me and for the whole world. And the message is simply this. He says to Thomas, don't be an unbeliever, but believe. In verse 27, then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. So my dear friends, may I ask you this morning, where is your faith? Who is the Lord of your life? Do you have peace in your life? And the reason we do not have peace is when the system in which we have put our faith, which we trust will solve our life's problems, whether it is our marriage relationships, whether it is a sickness or disease or overcoming grief, and it's not working for you, you will not have peace in your life. And that's where the biggest blessing of Easter is. You know, the first words that come out of Jesus' mouth when he sees his disciples, in this passage you read it 3 times. It says, "Peace be with you." You know what resurrection does? You know what this encounter does with this resurrected Jesus? He says, first, I'm going to give you peace. When you transfer your trust to me, if you're going to trust me with your life, I'm going to give you peace in all of life situations. And it's first of all, you know, the word peace presupposes that there are 2 parties in a relationship and they are aligning with each other in their heart, in their mind, and in their actions. Why is it that we lose peace in our marriage? I mean, marriage is one of the most beautiful institutions, but also one of the most revealing institutions, because it reveals to you how imperfect are 2 people. And when 2 imperfect people come together, it exposes all the misalignments. But to experience that peace, the reason we don't have that is, first of all, because we don't have that peace with God. I mean, there was a time when God had perfect peace with the people he created in the Garden of Eden. And the first relationship breakup happened in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve thought that it is not fun to let God control their lives. And when they got tempted and said, "Do you want to be the God of your life?" and they took that, it disrupted their peace with God. And the consequence of that was death. Because Bible says the wages of sin is death. And since then, all relationships have been messed up. Their children end up killing each other. And it keeps perpetuating all the way till today. And now someone has to restore that relationship. And that's why Jesus comes. He comes to restore our relationship with God. And for that, not just our relationship with Him, through that, He can restore our relationship with one another and also overcome death. That if you die tonight, do you know for sure that you have a life after this and you will be able to go there? And Jesus said, "Let me take that death and deal with it." And so what happened on Good Friday was the death of death in the death of Jesus Christ. And what happens on Easter is the victory over death that Jesus comes. Because when He overcame that, He rose again and He went to be with God, and God accepted His sacrifice. We can now have peace with God. That's the first thing that comes out of Easter. The second thing He says is you can experience the presence of God. After 40 days, Jesus went and He now sends His Spirit that can actually be in all of our hearts. We don't have to feel, "Oh, I was not there when Jesus came alive. Mary got to see Jesus. Thomas got to see Jesus. I didn't get to see Jesus." He says, no, every single one of you can experience the same presence, because when you come and surrender your life and say, "I'm not going to control my life, I surrender it to you," He comes into our heart. And He actually changes us. You and I don't have the power to change yourself. You know, I grew up as a very angry, rebellious teenager when I lost my father at the age of 15. I stopped believing in the existence of God. And my question was, if there is a God and He cares about this world, why did He make my mother a widow, and why did He make our life so miserable? And there was this anger that was constantly swelling in me. You just have to touch me and you could see the wrath of fury come upon you. And as I grew up and I felt bad about being this horrible person, destroying all the relationships around me and wanted to take care of myself, and every day I try harder and harder, I couldn't, because I still thought I can do it. I can just make myself a better person, isn't it? Until a friend of mine shared with me about this Jesus. And what I had to do was nothing. Just believe in what he did and surrender. Move my faith from myself to him. And my life changed. Effortlessly, I could see that my rage and anger disappeared. It's not that I'm a perfect person now. I do get angry, and driving in 880 is not fun sometimes, and it does show up. But it's not that rage, it's not that anger, and I could see, how did this power come inside me? I never thought I could do this. Because this resurrected Jesus, he's not just hanging on that cross or sitting in a picture somewhere or on these big Gothic churches in Europe. He's in my heart, and I can actually say the same thing as Mary did and Thomas did, my Lord and my God. Because Jesus is alive, and he can live in you and in me. And the third thing that comes as a result of this is, he says that he doesn't just come to change your life and my life. He says he gives you power. In verse 20, it says, when he had said this, he showed them his hands to his disciples and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. You know what that means? You and I have the power to go and make a difference in this world. He gives you a new purpose. Until now, because I thought I have to control my life, I was trying to create my life, I was trying to sculpt my life and pursue a path which I thought was going to make my life wonderful, whether it was taking the next level in my career or acquiring more wealth or passionately putting my trust in finding a perfect relationship. But now, he gives you a new purpose. He says, there are so many broken people in this world, and I'm giving you the power. They do not know what forgiveness is. There are people who live who haven't forgiven themselves for the things they have done in their past. There are marriages today that are in the brink of collapse because a husband and a wife cannot forgive themselves for one word the spouse may have spoken years ago. Because you do not have the power to forgive. But God says, when you let me into your heart, I can give you the power to forgive others and help them receive the forgiveness from God. And your life can have purpose. And that's beautiful. Changed people. Change people. And it's not an isolated incident in my life. Over the centuries, lives have been changed. Addictions have disappeared. Marriages have been restored. This tech executive that I was talking to you about, she quit her job from this high-profile company and started a new venture, a nonprofit in San Francisco. She opened up a home and she brought in a lot of at-risk youth who were about the same age as her son. She brought them in. Some of them were gangsters, some of them were drug addicts, some of them came from the prison system who were incarcerated. He brought them all, and these were people nobody wanted to love. People are afraid of and scared of, and they themselves thought they have no hope other than to continue this lifestyle. She brings them into this house, and she uses her experience and expertise and networks to introduce them the love of Jesus and tell them they are special, they are unique, they are incredibly loved, and helps them find their talents and connects them with all the companies that she knows and helps them to have a new life. Literally new life. You see? But it couldn't happen unless she was able to let go of her faith in her strength and her power and her capabilities. And she had this Mary moment and Thomas moment and could say, my Lord and my God. She believed She believed. That's what Jesus wants us for today. In the last verse of this chapter, this John writes how Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. He picks this unique experience. You know what happens to Thomas? The person who said this? He becomes one of the most radical disciples of Jesus. He travels literally halfway around the world and comes to India. By sea, he comes to the west coast of India, and he shares about the love of Jesus to the people who had never heard about that. And Thomas brought Christianity to India 2,000 years ago. And there are churches that exist even till today. They're called the Mar Thoma Church from the entire west coast. And finally, he ended up being killed just like Jesus was. It actually happened in my hometown of Chennai. There is a small mount which is actually called St. Thomas Mount. It's a mile away from my wife's house. He was able to have a new purpose in life and literally go and take this blessing to others, because he thought now his life purpose is to help people experience this Jesus in their life. And so he writes in the last verse, John says, I picked this because you know why? Verse 31. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. You know, the word life, English just has one word for life, but in the Greek there are two words for life. One is bios, from which comes biology, the physical, biological life, and the other is zoe, from which it talks of a life that exists forever, eternally. So he says, when you believe, you're not just going to experience God in this life, you can actually have hope to overcome death yourself and live with God forever. Do you have that assurance today? Maybe when you're young, you're not thinking so much about death, but when this will become very important is when you lose someone who is dear to you. And as a pastor, I've done funerals for people from all faiths and all kinds of life backgrounds. And they all have only one question: will I be able to see my loved one again? Well, Jesus says, yes, you can. Heaven, he says, is a free gift. He gives it as a free gift. But you cannot earn it or deserve it. Isn't it? Some of you came here for the first time, and if you were to ask us, how much should I pay for this gift? That would be so offensive in any culture, isn't it? A gift is meant to be received. And that's what Jesus offers. He says, heaven is a free gift, but you can't earn it or you can't deserve it. But then when you look at yourself, and if you're honest with yourself, you see that we are all broken people, messed up people. The Bible calls it as sin. Sin is like there is this perfect standard. If you look at this target and you're trying to throw a dart, if you hit the bullseye, that's God's perfection of morality, or even your own perfection of morality. But if your dart keeps falling down, if you keep missing the mark, that's what God says is sin. And how many times do you think you do it each day? I know most of you guys are engineers, and let's just do some simple elementary math. I think you could probably say there would at least be once or twice your brokenness comes out, in anger or jealousy, or maybe twice or thrice. You guys are giving me a look like we're all perfect. Well, I'll take myself, all right? I do way more, and I'll try to be modest. Let's say I do 3 sins a day, whatever, And let's assume I was a very good boy till I was 5 years old and did nothing, though my mom would not agree with that. I just celebrated my 50th birthday this past year, and so 45 years minus 5 is 40. So if I'm doing 3 sins a day, approximately in a year, in a month it's 90, or let's say 100, and in a year maybe 1,000. And if I'm calculating it, I'm probably at 40,000 sins so far. And I want to live for another 50 years. Boy, you don't want me to? Somebody doesn't want me to. And that's probably going to be like a 90,000 sins. And what do you think? I mean, you know that when you violate a small speed limit, you get a ticket, right? A working justice system can't let you go. Maybe in India you can try to bribe and get your way around, but not here. So if God were to say, and it's like, it's against who I am committing this violation is going to decide the consequence. And when I'm committing this offense against an infinitely holy God, and if He were to punish me for every single one of those close to 100,000, I don't think I can take it. I cannot save myself. The Bible also says God is love. You know, in 1 John 4:8 it says God is love. He's a loving God. Everybody believes that, no matter which faith, religion you are part of. But God is also holy and just. He can't just let you go and walk free. So how does God resolve this is in the person of Jesus Christ. You know, who is Jesus? And he was fully man, like you and me. He hungered, he thirsted, he wept when his best friend died, and he went through all the emotions that you and I can go through, but he was also 100% God. And it's because of that there was a possibility. You know, that if we were to say that all the sins that I did in my life, they're pulling me down, and God's here, He's perfect, and He's holy, and I'm trying to reach Him, and I can't. And so God says, I'm going to send my Son Jesus to this world. He lived a perfect life that you and I cannot live. And He said, because I love you, I'm going to take the consequences of your thousands and thousands of sin upon me, because I am God too. And He takes it all on Himself. And I'm light. I am free. And I can now go to be with God. And that's the whole purpose that He came. But for this to happen in my life, the missing link is faith. I have to believe. The first time I heard this, it was so radical, I thought, wait, I don't have to do anything? Seriously? I mean, I thought every religion has a few things I have to do. You guys say I don't have to do anything? Really? Faith is not just intellectual assent. It's not believing all the things the disciples believed, but it's really putting your trust upon Him. And when you do that, when you're able to believe, He says He can come into your life, and He starts this process of making you a better person. So my dear friends, I want to encourage you this morning to ask yourself, what are you believing in to live your life, and invite you to put your trust in this Jesus. He will give you a new purpose. He will give meaning for your life. And if you're a Christian, you can still believe in Jesus and hold some areas of your life where you don't want Him to be the Lord. You're still trying to have those previous memories, and you don't want to let God be in control of those areas. And that's perhaps why you're not experiencing peace. You don't want to reorient your marriage in a way that God wants you to. You're still fighting it. Or you're still trying to put your trust on other things. And God says, I want to be the Lord of your life. And that's what I want to pray for us this morning. Would you join with me in prayer?